as you mentioned, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman used to call the partnership between OpenAI and Microsoft, quote, the best bromance in tech. But according to some new reporting by the New York Times, that partnership has started to sour a bit. So if you recall, this began with Microsoft investing $13 billion into OpenAI, basically giving them a bunch of essential funding and, importantly, computing power. However, after OpenAI's board briefly ousted Altman last November, apparently Microsoft started reconsidering its approach to further investments, according to the Times. Now, OpenAI has a lot of financial challenges. They have expected losses of $5 billion this year, and they've been seeking additional funds and computing resources from Microsoft specifically. However, apparently they have been hesitant to increase that commitment, which has led OpenAI to explore other options to fund and support their growth. In response, OpenAI has also been attempting to renegotiate its deal with Microsoft, aiming to secure more computing power and reduce expenses. They also recently, which we reported on, broadened their investor base, closing a $6.6 billion funding round recently. Now, Microsoft has also started to hedge its bets, it sounds like. In March, the company invested at least $650 million in what you might call an acqui-hire to get most of the staff from Inflection, which was an OpenAI competitor. Mustafa Suleyman, Inflection's former CEO, now oversees a new Microsoft group working on AI that could potentially replace what OpenAI offers. And that's also been causing some friction, it sounds like, based on this reporting. OpenAI executives and employees expressed frustration over Suleyman being at Microsoft and concerns about sharing of technology between the two companies. So, Paul, there's never a dull moment at OpenAI. Like, can you maybe break down some of the complexities for us here? Like, Microsoft has this huge vested interest in OpenAI's success, at least it seems like, but they also appear to be creating obstacles to the company's success, kind of helping them grow, but not too crazy. OpenAI increasingly seems to be in a competitive, not a collaborative position here. Like, what's going on?
Yeah, it's wild. We've talked about this relationship a number of times on episodes over the last year and a half. And I recall in the last couple months, just the first time that Microsoft identified OpenAI as a competitor, like officially, I think within like their earnings reports. And
Yeah.
we've, obviously when Inflection was brought kind of through that acqui-hire, that seemed odd. You certainly could understand how that could ruffle some feathers on OpenAI's side by putting Mustafa in the position he was in, especially as it sounds like made the main point of contact for Microsoft and OpenAI. So I think this article, again, I would highly recommend people read it. It's by Cade Matz, who's the author of Genius Makers and heavily sourced within all these companies, Mike Isaac and Aaron Griffith at New York Times. There's quite a few details in here I had not heard yet that usually every time Cade is involved in doing an article on AI, there's something comes out that you previously weren't aware of. So I'll zip through a few of the things that I, did a double take on or kind of made specific notes on as I was going through it. So I had not previously heard that OpenAI was trying to raise billions from Microsoft prior to November 2023 when Sam was temporarily ousted. If that had been reported, I had not seen it anywhere. So the article said Nadella was initially willing to keep the cash spigot flowing, but after OpenAI's board of directors briefly ousted Mr. Altman last November, Nadella and Microsoft reconsidered, according to 4 people familiar with the talks. And then, as you mentioned, that he was shocked and concerned by the firing. OpenAI has been trying to renegotiate the deal. This makes sense in the context of we know they're trying to shift to this for-profit entity, but not only do they have the nonprofit current structure that is restrictive, their agreement with Microsoft is highly restrictive. And for the for-profit change to occur and for them to eventually IPO, I would imagine there needs to be a reimagination of the OpenAI-Microsoft relationship. And Microsoft may be in no hurry to do that because if I'm not mistaken, they have 49% ownership of the for-profit entity. I think we reported on a recent episode, there was like a certain percentage of their revenue, like I think it was 20% of all
Yeah.
revenue or something goes
Yeah.
back to Microsoft. And I believe there was a profit cap too, where like the first 100 million or 100 billion or some crazy number was Microsoft's money too. Like I mean, Microsoft's got a sweet deal here. Plus they get inside access to the technology. And it's just like, it's not ideal for where OpenAI wants to go. It was like fundamental to get them where they are, but it makes sense that they would be trying to negotiate this. So the article said over the past year, the AI company repeatedly tried to renegotiate a lower cost on compute and allow it to buy compute from other companies because they didn't feel like Microsoft was giving them enough. It did say Microsoft agreed to an exception in the contract recently that allowed OpenAI to sign a roughly $10 billion computing deal with Oracle. I had
Mhm.
not seen that reporting. That one I would assume has been out because that's a pretty big deal for Oracle. So I would guess that information is out there somewhere. Um, and it said in recent weeks, OpenAI and Microsoft renegotiated a change to a future contract that reduces how much Microsoft will charge the company for the computing power. You mentioned that there's these concerns internally about, Mustafa's management style and maybe what Microsoft is doing. Said, and some have complained that if another company beats, this is an interesting one that leads to an issue later on. Some have complained that if another company beat it to the creation of AI that matches the human brain, so basically AGI, Microsoft will be to blame because it hasn't given OpenAI the computing power it needs.
Mm.
So that's kind of interesting. Some of the issues around Microsoft, like it almost seems like what Microsoft is doing, and this may not be correct, but it seems like OpenAI thinks they're slow playing them on the compute access they're giving them
Mhm.
so they can build their own internal competing tools and not be reliant on OpenAI anymore.
Mm.
So you bring in Mustafa. Mustafa now owns the relationship with OpenAI, but he's also in charge of building OpenAI or Microsoft's own capabilities with Kevin Scott and the team there. And so it's like, let's just slow play this over the next 12 months. We'll build up an equivalent model to what OpenAI has. We have all the inside information on what they're building next. So like we can get there where they get there. And then we're not relying on them anymore, which I asked, like there was 2 episodes ago where I said, sure seems like Microsoft just relies on OpenAI for all this innovation. If
Right.
I'm wrong, someone from Microsoft, like call us. But it does appear that this is basically validating what I was saying, that Microsoft's aware they're too reliant on OpenAI, so they're trying to build around them. So imagine Microsoft sitting there a year from now, maybe they have a competing model. They're not relying on OpenAI's tech anymore, and they still own 49% of the company. So Microsoft seems to have all this leverage, but then the most fascinating part of the article brings back a unique nuance of the relationship that some people maybe either forgot or didn't know, which is the contract is void if OpenAI achieves AGI. So in the original deal with Microsoft, with all the access to the technology, everything else, if OpenAI achieved AGI, Microsoft doesn't get access to that technology. And that was a clause they put in because they wanted to make sure, and supposedly, that it would be used responsibly, and they didn't want a third party having access to like this AGI technology. And so that's what the article said. The clause was meant to ensure that a company like Microsoft did not misuse this machine of the future. But today, OpenAI executives see it as a path to a better contract, according to a person familiar with negotiations. Under the terms of the contract, the OpenAI board would decide when AGI has arrived.
Hmm.
That is the most fascinating part of all of this. So imagine Microsoft has all this leverage. Like, we're not going to give you more compute. We're going to charge you exorbitant fees for the compute. We're going to build our own tech. And OpenAI seems kind of helpless in this scenario, relying on Microsoft and their contract. But they have the trump card, which is, oh, yeah, by the way, GPT-5 is AGI. Our board has decided, so you don't get access to it. So both sides are going to try and play leverage. And if the contract truly is that, cut and dry, that if AGI is achieved, which is decided by the board of OpenAI, which is what we've heard over and over again, then all the board of OpenAI has to do is say GPT-5 is AGI, and and then we're done. Like, Microsoft doesn't get it.
Hmm.
And so that's the game we're playing, which makes me like go back to last year. Sam Altman did a Lex Friedman podcast, or maybe it was early this year. And I remember Lex asking him about like GPT-4 and did he think it was AGI? And Sam's like, I don't know. Like, do you think it is? And knowing how Sam approaches things, there's this part of me that now looks back and thinks that was a totally intentional thing to like a shot over at Microsoft saying, maybe this, maybe we're already there in this contract situation we're having is, we're willing to play that leverage if we need to. So that led me to like, oh, maybe we're going to get to AGI in society just because OpenAI wants out of their contract with Microsoft.
Yeah, that struck me too, is like, we know and we talk about all the time that the leaders at these companies do appear to genuinely believe they are on the path to building AGI, but now there's a direct incentive for them to also contractually say what they have
Yeah,
is AGI.
it's fascinating. Yeah, so I definitely read the article. There's a lot more that I'm not touching on here, but there was a lot of really fascinating elements to this, and it got into like Apple's relationship with them a little bit,
Mhm.
and like the one thing I thought was fascinating is, so back in 2022, as OpenAI was developing the technologies that would drive ChatGPT, Altman and Kevin Scott, the CTO of Microsoft, met with executives at Apple to explore those three companies working together. This is
Hmm.
before ChatGPT.
Hmm.
I had no idea they were talking with Apple back then. Um, and that Microsoft would be involved in doing a deal with that. I mean, it's just wild. Like, I would
Yeah.
love to like click into that story angle because they just kind of left that paragraph hanging there. It's like, whoa, hold on a second. This feels like a whole nother chapter of the book.
I'm selfishly hoping that this is a prelude to Cade's next book
Me
on
too.
all this.
I,
Yes,
I've
Genius
joked
Makers
online
is
with them
so
a
good.
couple times, like, when is Genius Makers 2 coming out?
Yeah, right. So to kind of wrap this up, like, OpenAI is obviously facing this issue with Microsoft, but also like in the past weeks, like we've talked about Ilya starting his own venture. OpenAI tries to restrict its own investors from funding that company, along with a few others. This week, we got a report that former CTO Mira Murati is now raising purportedly a ton of money for her new startup. I saw $100 million quoted. The startup aims to build AI products based on proprietary models, according to Reuters. Like, we've talked about, there's only a handful of companies out here that can actually like build these frontier models, but like, how worried does OpenAI also need to be about like its ex-employees forming companies to compete with them?
It seems like probably very. I don't know. I mean, like, their secrets are just going out the door every week with
Yeah.
all these leaders. I mean, there was a visual I saw in one article where it was like, I don't know, like 14 founding members and actual like co-founders of OpenAI, and the only people left are Greg and Sam, and I think
Yep.
there was one other person on that list, but all of them are gone and seemingly doing their own thing. So yeah, it's a fascinating story. I mean, I don't know. That's why like every week we end up talking about OpenAI because it's just always new angles to the story, and it is so instrumental to where this all goes.